Okay, moving right along with our second story for this edition of the Rolling Stone. This takes us to New York, okay? Because Governor Andrew Cuomo was giving a press conference about the coronavirus. This was this past Monday, May the 11th. And during this presser, Governor Andrew Cuomo referred to the coronavirus as the European virus. Okay? Now, it wasn't just a slip of a tongue. He didn't say it once and then was like, oop, my bad, and then referred to it as the novel coronavirus or COVID-19 or anything. No. Several times he referred to it as the European virus. I want to quote just a few things of what he said in that press conference. I'm quoting here from the Washington Examiner's story. This is what he said, quote, "If you had said when we started this, yes, we have more cases than anyone else. Yes, we had this European virus attack us, and nobody expected it. But we are not only going to change our trajectory, we are going to change the trajectory more dramatically than any place else in the nation. We had people in the airports stopping people from China, testing people from China. The federal government did a lot of testing, a lot of screening, people getting off planes from China. But meanwhile, the people from Europe were walking right past them," unquote. This right here is 1984 levels of historical rewriting. There's no other word for it. This right here, this press conference, is the second worst thing that Andrew Cuomo has done during this pandemic, right after shoving all those elderly people who tested positive for the virus back into the old folks' homes, where they were then able to spread it around to everyone else, and now tons and tons of elderly people have died because of that decision. If you want to talk about Trump having blood on his hands because of this whole scenario, then we can talk about Cuomo too. If Trump has blood on his hands, so does Cuomo. But this is so Orwellian. In fact, this is more Orwellian. This press conference where he called the coronavirus the European virus, this is more Orwellian than his lockdown orders, his stay-at-home orders, or anything else. I hope that you see what he did here. He did something very, very interesting here, okay? The reason why, the implication here is that the reason why the United States is in the predicament that it is with the coronavirus is because of racism. We were testing people who were getting off the plane who had come from China. We were testing Chinese people. Meanwhile, those Europeans, those people who look just like us, white, male, whatever, they were allowed to walk right past. Now, put that in your pipe, put it under your hat, because we're going to come back to it in just a second. My guess is that what Cuomo is doing here is that he is trying to draw attention to the fact that Italy was if I'm remembering the timeline correctly, Italy was the second country to really get slammed by the coronavirus. Okay? The problem is, Italy is not where the coronavirus originated. It originated in China. There are two common claims. There are two broad claims, okay, about where the coronavirus came from. The first claim is that it came from the wet markets in Wuhan, that the wet markets that offer exotic animals for sale so that people can take them home, cook them up and everything for dinner. One claim is that, well, obviously, that is where this whole thing started. Some of the animals there had this new strain of coronavirus, this COVID-19. The people bought those animals, cooked them for dinner, ingested it, and then because the virus has an incubation period of 10 to 14 days, they were spreading it around before they knew that they were sick, and poof, it just exploded after that. That's the first claim. The second claim, though, is that it actually came from the virology lab in Wuhan. Okay? And that, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that's the second claim. Now, why? Because 3 Chinese scientists actually wrote a paper where they said, wait a minute. The horseshoe bat, these species of horseshoe bats, which are the real primary carriers of coronaviruses. Again, there's more than one. COVID-19 is what we're dealing with right now, meaning that there have been 18 previous strains of this thing. Okay, so the species of horseshoe bat that are one of the primary carriers of coronavirus strains, they were not being sold in the wet markets in Wuhan. And those horseshoe bats, their habitat is not anywhere near Wuhan. So why was Wuhan the epicenter of this whole thing? Why did the virus start in Wuhan if there was nothing there for people to actually contract the virus from? Well, wouldn't you know, there were bats in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. In fact, the institute back in November of 2019 had actually had a job listing where they said, hey, we need people to study the bats. Okay, this is Google Trend. This is actually, let me find it here. This is a story that Jim Garrity wrote for National Review. Headline: The Trail Leading Back to the Wuhan Labs. Okay, and he has a translation, a Google translation of the first job posting that the Wuhan Institute of Virology put out in November of 2019. This is what that job listing says. Google translation again. Quote: taking bats as the research object, I will answer the molecular mechanism that can coexist with Ebola and SARS-associated coronavirus for a long time without disease and its relationship with flight and longevity. Virology, immunology, cell biology, and multiple omics are used to compare the differences between humans and other mammals. Omics is a term for a subfield within biology, such as genomics. Okay, just so that we're perfectly clear on that. So, and that is actually the claim that I adhere to, again, because you have 3 Chinese national scientists saying that no, it didn't come from the wet markets, it came from the laboratories. And that doesn't mean necessarily that it was deliberately unleashed upon the world, but, as you know, I have my own thoughts, theories about that, or hypotheses about that. But there seems to be no doubt that, in my mind at least, that it did come from this virology laboratory. But even if you don't agree with that, even if you say, you're smoking something and I wish I had a puff, it obviously came from the wet markets or whatever, doesn't get rid of the big picture that this thing started in China. Now you might be saying, well, but how did Italy get hit so bad? Well, because several leather factories in northern Italy had recently been bought out by Chinese companies. And the Chinese companies were flying Chinese workers to operate those factories in Italy. And wouldn't you know, that a lot of those workers came from Wuhan. And they were being flown in and flown out, flown in and flown out. So there were multiple opportunities for these Chinese workers to contract the coronavirus in Wuhan and then bring it in Italy. And then from northern Italy, it spread to the south for the rest of Italy. And then, of course, because Europe is so interconnected, it went to Germany, to France, to Spain, to Portugal, hopped the channel to the UK, and that's where we are today. Now. So there's no way of getting around it. That's also why the World Health Organization has been covering for China for all this time. Why would the World Health Organization, why would it have been lying so much in regards to, China's response to the virus, China delaying, telling anyone that, it was contractable? Why would it be covering for China if this thing didn't come from China? Why would the Chinese be destroying strands of the coronavirus if it didn't come from China? Because, of course, it did. It totally did. So Andrew Cuomo, calling it the European virus, as I will repeat it again, it is Orwellian in the truest fashion of the word, because he is rewriting history. He is rewriting history for the sake of being woke. For the sake of being woke, because now the mentality has set in, the idea has set in that forget about calling it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan flu or whatever. We're past that now. Now, if you even say that it came from China, obviously you are being racist towards the Chinese people. If you blame the Chinese Communist Party for the decisions it made to cover up its own tracks, to keep everything as much under the lid as it could in regards to this thing, wasting precious time that could have been used to maybe even prevent the pandemic from happening in the first place. If you say any of those things, you are obviously being racist, not only to Chinese people, but you are being racist towards all Asian people, regardless of ethnicity and or nationality, and you are being racist towards Chinese Americans and Asian Americans as well. That is the message. That is now the narrative going forward. And brother, let me tell you that is a decision that is just sown. It's practically just bursting with disaster. Not even just potential disaster, but disaster with a capital D. Because now, what we are saying is that we can't even be truthful about pandemics anymore. We can't be truthful about the simple facts of where a disease started. So then, which means, that's a basic fact of any pandemic, any sort of virus, any sort of disease. Where did it start from? Okay, it started here. Why did it start here? What happened here? Maybe if we can figure that out, we can, take steps to prevent this specific sort of virus from causing a pandemic again. Maybe we can actually save lives here. But as Sherlock Holmes would say, data, 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 I cannot make bricks without straw. If we don't have data, if we don't know, if we don't have the whole picture or as complete a picture as we can get, then we are fumbling around in the dark and we don't know. We are blinding ourselves and we are opening ourselves up, not only for a repeat of this particular virus, but we are opening ourselves up for more pandemics. Because what now if a virus originates in Egypt or in Vietnam or in Japan or in Malaysia or Tibet, or for anywhere in the Middle East, the Congo, Madagascar, any of those places? What is going to be the reaction? You can't talk about where it originated. You can't talk about where it originated because that's racist. What we have said is that racism is more important. Combating racism is more important than actually saving lives by looking at facts squarely in the face, accumulating as many facts as we can so that we can actually take steps to prevent this sort of thing from happening again. And I put racism in quotes for a specific reason, because there has not been, racism, there have been, according to the newspapers, there have been so many claims, and it's so hard to tell anymore, who is actually being genuine, who is not. Based on some stories I've read, yes, it is true. I think that there have been some personal attacks made against Americans who are of Asian descent, whether they're Chinese or not, is irrelevant in that case. And those cases are absolutely wrong, morally reprehensible, absolutely. But has there been this huge wave of anti-Asian sentiment? I don't think so. There is no claim for that, because everybody knows Everybody knows that this disease strikes everyone. And just because you say, hey, it started over here, does not mean, oh, Chinese people are responsible. That's not what, nobody is saying that. Well, I won't say nobody. But if people who are making that argument are very few, very far between, and nobody is listening to them. Which is a good thing, because they don't deserve to be listened to. This is just another example of wokeness, of intersectionality, it's not even political correctness anymore, because it has exasperated beyond that. But intersectionality, wokeness, critical theory, taking over from objectivity, which is a very dangerous thing, because, as I just laid out, when objectivity is thrown out the door, then you are bearing yourself open for anything to happen, for any sort of horrible things to happen to you, to your communities, to your family, to your country, to your civilization, because you are willingly blinding yourself in order to be seen as a quote-unquote good person. In my book, a good person is someone who would actually take steps to prevent this sort of thing from happening again. I mean, we keep hearing about how women are being harmed, minorities are being harmed. If we really cared about those people, then we would want to be prepared. But apparently, we can't be prepared, because that's racism too. We are getting bundled up into this like metal spiky pretzel, and any which way, any move that you make, it's racism, it's racism, it's racism, which means that nothing is going to get done, which means that we're not going to be able to actually genuinely progress, but which also means that we're not even going to be able to flourish. We can't even keep the status quo. We're just going to be devolving. That's what this story really shows. That's what Andrew Cuomo has given his full consent to by calling the coronavirus the European virus. That is story number 2.